Well, good morning, or soon to be afternoon, everyone. I have the challenge of speaking to you right before lunch. Hopefully you'll bear with me. Well, now that we've heard about how terrible capitalism is, and it is terrible, we've got to talk about the only alternative, socialism, and whether it's possible right here in the richest capitalist country that ever existed. Later in the conference, you'll have the opportunity to go over the ABCs of socialism and communism, and delve even further into the strategies and tactics of struggle. I'll just assume that everyone here wants to learn more about socialism and isn't reflexively hostile to socialism. We can deal with all the myths and distortions about socialism in the workshops, but here let's go beyond all of that talk and talk about whether socialism can happen here in the United States. First, a bit about what socialism is. Socialism is the goal of our struggle. It's why we're here today. It is the alternative, the revolutionary change that the 99% of society so desperately needs. Socialism is a social and economic system where the working and oppressed classes join together, make a revolution, seize state power, and take the reins of society's institutions and government, and then run society in their interests. This means socialism is a society where the factories, farms, hotels, and the rest of the means of production are owned and run by working people to meet the needs of workers and the poor. Under socialism, there is no private profit. There is no exploitation of labor. There is no Wall Street greed and Pentagon war machine to attack working people in other countries. Instead of capitalist unemployment, homelessness, lack of health care, attacks on public education, environmental destruction and racism, bigotry, and war, under socialism, jobs are a right. Free health care is a right. Education is a right. And the government would work to eliminate climate change, stop racism and attacks on immigrants, women, and LGBT people. Socialism means true justice and equality for the 100% of society, not just for the 1%. So it should be immediately clear that socialist society would benefit the working class and the poor. It would benefit everyone except the billionaire bankers and corporate fat cats on Wall Street, so everyone should be for socialism. The real question for us then today is whether socialism can be established in the United States. Is it a utopian goal, or is it something worth fighting for? Can we win? In fact, the United States would be one of the easiest places to have a socialist system. Over the last century, in almost every country where there has been a socialist revolution, the new working class government has had to deal with extreme underdevelopment and the legacy of colonialism. A socialist United States, on the other hand, would not have to worry about underdevelopment. The task of creating socialism in Russia, China, Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba was so much greater a task than ours is today, in many ways. Imagine not only creating and then following through on a revolution, but then also have to create your entire infrastructure from scratch. Not only do we in the United States have a productive, highly industrialized infrastructure in place, we literally got productivity and efficiency down to a science. Although the wealth it generates is controlled by a handful of capitalists, the U.S. economy is by far the largest in the world. The United States makes up 25% of the world's economy. This country produces nearly $15 trillion of goods and services every year. We have the wealth and technology to eliminate poverty and hunger. Few other places on earth have such a diverse and abundant supply of natural resources. Rather than having to grapple with the difficult task of building up economic capacity, all that would be required in the United States would be to put this existing wealth to use for benefit of working people. But some people would also say that socialism is not possible because a society without capitalists would break down into chaos because we need them to watch over us. But do we really? Let's look at what a capitalist really does. The tiny capitalist class that controls our society contributes nothing really beneficial to it at all. If the billionaires, the CEOs, and the Wall Street bankers do not come into the office, the productivity of the economy is unaffected. Although they create nothing of value, they amass tremendous wealth simply because they own the means of production. The working class, as a whole, already possesses the skills needed to keep society functioning. If workers do not go to work, if we go on strike, production stops. Work comes to a halt and no wealth is created. That is because workers create all the wealth of society and make it run. It is true that the capitalists organize production, but they organize it on the basis of profit. As a result, millions suffer from malnutrition, while there is more than enough for every human being to eat. Millions are homeless where there is an abundance of unoccupied housing. Workers are capable of managing and organizing production, so we would be much better off without the mismanagement of the capitalist class. Far from making it impossible for society to function, the absence of a parasitic capitalist class would make it possible to organize a society centering on meeting human needs. So, establishing socialism in the United States is economically feasible, but are we capable of making a revolution? Many academics, political commentators, and even some activists embrace an ideology of American exceptionalism, arguing that the unique conditions of the United States make the population particularly capitalist-minded, individualistic, and incapable of radicalization. However, there's a rich history of working people rising up against oppression. It has simply just been left out of our school textbooks. Immediately following independence from Britain, hundreds of small farmers took up arms and joined Shays' Rebellion against extortionist creditors in Massachusetts. And in the years between independence and the Civil War, major slave rebellions broke out in Virginia, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And as the Industrial Revolution transformed production, huge strikes broke out. During the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, hundreds of thousands of workers across the United States withheld their labor and brought the economy to a halt. Armed uprisings were brutally suppressed by state and federal forces, but workers briefly took control of parts of St. Louis and Pittsburgh. A strong socialist movement developed around the turn of the century that won the support of millions of workers. Communist and socialist parties led major strikes during the Great Depression and organized the unemployed. Over 5,000 people in Los Angeles were members of the Communist Party up through the 1940s. In the 1950s and the 1960s, huge movements against war and racism shook the capitalist state. The Civil Rights Movement defeated Jim Crow segregation, while massive anti-war demonstrations challenged U.S. imperialism. Mass women's and LGBT movements demanded equality. Revolutionary organizers like the Black Panthers were formed that recognized the roots of these injustices in the capitalist system itself. While building class consciousness and a revolutionary movement has never been easy, and in many ways, we've been set back in recent decades, working and poor people in the United States are continuing this legacy of struggle today. In Wisconsin, tens of thousands of workers participated in daily demonstrations and occupied the state capitol building to protect their collective bargaining rights. Massive demonstrations also took place in Ohio and Indiana, and local demonstrations against budget cuts are taking place all across the country. Now, the Occupy movement has attacked the capitalist system by its anti-Wall Street stance and posed a key question for millions of people. If this system is so bad, what's the alternative and how will we get there? We have an answer for that. Socialism is the alternative, and we get there by making a revolution. It's easy to say and much harder to do, but we know that revolution is possible in the United States. But just because it's possible doesn't mean that we can just wait for the capitalist system to collapse or vote it out in the next election. Capitalism is not just going away on its own. It is inevitable that the contradictions of capitalism will intensify and lead to greater and greater unrest. What's not inevitable is that this unrest, this fight back, will lead to the establishment of socialism. That requires the intervention of a revolutionary party to unite different struggles together by what we have in common. And what do we have in common? We all work for a living, we are poor, we are oppressed by the system, there are different levels of income, different ways that people are oppressed, and we recognize all of those things. We do not have our heads in the sand. We know that many U.S. workers, especially from more privileged sectors of society, are infected with chauvinism, racism, sexism, homophobia, and all sorts of ideas and habits that only serve to divide us. We know that we live in a world still dominated by capitalism and all of its daily oppressions and tax and divisions. But we also know that the interests of the capitalist owners and of workers are ultimately irreconcilable. They need to make as much profit and exploit as much labor as possible, and we need to work, eat, and have a place to live. Capitalism gives the owners all they need and more, but it guarantees workers nothing but misery and degradation. Most of the people in the world today are suffering from economic depression and recession. We can see through the Occupy movement, people are beginning to come together to demand justice from the oppression of many at the hands of a few. Only a vigorous, working class struggle against the system and all of its ills will be able to move us forward towards socialism. We, as revolutionaries, must seek to promote class-wide unity as we fight for socialism by being an integral part of all workers' struggles. Consciousness and unity in our class arise out of struggle, organizing, and fighting against oppression. Our party exists so that our class, the working class, can develop the leadership that we need to win. Not a leadership that puts it above the class, but a leadership that is self-sacrificing and rooted in workers' struggles. That's why we need a revolutionary party. To have an organized leadership in place that is ready and willing to intervene in the struggles of our people, to throw out the Wall Street bankers and their political managers in Washington who oppress us. If we don't build a party to organize for a revolutionary struggle, it's not going to happen by itself. This is our task, and this is how we seek to build a revolutionary movement in the United States. It can happen. It is happening now. I urge you to join the PSL in this struggle so that we can move forward together towards a socialist future. Thank you.